In November, 37 governor seats are up for grabs. The contests touch on almost every aspect of politics, from the redistricting of congressional seats to the landscape for the 2012 presidential contest. It's looking like a bad year for Democrats nationally, and the question is whether that will affect the state races too. Nathan Daschle is the executive director of the Democratic Governors Association and joins me to talk about their fall election strategy. Nathan, the Post poll yesterday, the Wall Street Journal poll, bad news for Democrats at the national level. How's it looking in those 37 gubernatorial races?
You know, there is no question that this is going to be a difficult landscape for Democrats, I think, around the country. I think there's still a desire and anxiety among the electorate, and the Democrats are in power. So, and you add to that the historical trends. The president's party normally loses 5.5 governor's races in the first midterm election. So we anticipated this would be a tough year. But we actually see a tremendous number of opportunities for us this year. We can go on offense in no fewer than 9 states. And I think that's pretty telling. And we feel very good about our ability to pick up a number of seats this year.
Why can you go on offense? Does it have anything to do with national issues, or is it these are openings in very specific ways in 9 different races?
You know, it's a good question. It has to do with national issues to the extent that the electorate out there is no more pro-Republican electorate than it is a pro-Democratic electorate. And I think this year the governor's races are going to offer a number of proof points to demonstrate that. Voters right now just want real leadership. They want somebody, particularly at the state level, who's going to stand up and say, I'm going to create jobs, I'm going to build a better education system, a better healthcare system, and I'm going to deliver services efficiently. And I'm going to give you a vision to show that tomorrow's going to be better than today. That's what governor's races are about. And frankly, I think that the Democratic candidates for governor are far better suited to make that message than the Republican candidates. One of the things going on this year that I think makes this election year so interesting is the civil war between the right and the far right. It's the Tea Party Republicans who are winning the civil war. And there are 2 types of candidates who are on the Republican side this year. You have the Tea Party candidates, and then you have candidates who've been scarred by the Tea Party. And I think neither one is in a good position to appeal to those moderate voters this fall.
We think about that in terms, or at least in Washington, we think about that in terms of the Senate races. I mean, you've got Rand Paul, the Democrats are making a lot out of Sharon Angle. Where in the governor's races are there vulnerabilities as a result of this civil war?
Sure, there are. I'll take you 4 states off the bat. In Colorado, you have a civil war between Dan Mays and Tom Tancredo running as an independent party. In Minnesota, the Republicans nominated the Tea Party candidate that Sarah Palin endorsed, Tom Emmer, who's a far, far right candidate, way outside the mainstream for Minnesota. In Maine, the Maine Republican Party literally adopted the Tea Party platform. And on top of that, they nominated the Tea Party candidate to be their standard bearer, Paul LePage, the candidate in Maine, is not of the moderate type who's been elected as a Republican in Maine in the past. And then in Florida, a marquee race, Rick Scott, shocking, stunning upset over Bill McCollum as the Tea Party candidate, and to the dismay, quite apparently, of the national Republican leadership, who's, I think, can barely hide their skepticism of his candidacy.
Well, let me ask you about 2 of those states. Colorado, it is the accepted wisdom that it's over, that basically the Republican candidate is a disaster. Haley Barbour, who's running the RGA, your opponents in this national game of 37 seats, said he will be ruthless about where he puts his money. And he said he's put money in Colorado before, but that left open the idea basically that he wasn't going to put any more money in Colorado for the Republican candidate. Is Colorado basically over?
Well, no race is over until it's over, and I would never want to declare victory prematurely. We obviously feel very good about the race. I think you've got John Hickenlooper, who is a phenomenal candidate, and I think will be a wonderful governor who appeals, I think, to people of all stripes all over the state. And you have 2 obviously very flawed, weak candidates running against him. He's beating both by 25, 30 points. So it's not over yet, but you could hardly be in a better position than he's in.
And now let's talk about Florida. Haley Barbour, the governor of Mississippi, was saying that Scott really isn't a Tea Party candidate. He's a kind of a self-funded fellow. And Barbour, obviously, the national Republicans are concerned about Scott. Is Florida now? Give us a sense of how much of an opportunity Florida may be.
Well, look, Florida's still going to be a very, very competitive race. Nothing's going to change that. But it has gotten better in 3 regards. One, our candidate, Alex Sink, gets better and better. She is out there relentlessly on a jobs message, which is exactly what Florida voters want to hear from the governor candidates this year. Number 2, Bud Childs dropped out as an independent. He probably wasn't going to be a tremendous factor. but he had the potential of siphoning off votes from Alex Sneak. And third, Rick Scott, the Madoff of Medicare, won on the Republican side. I mean, this is somebody, I mean, I understand Haley Barbour now has got to backtrack a little bit because, as you remember, during that primary, Haley Barbour was at Bill McCollum's side criticizing Rick Scott. The whole Republican establishment was doing everything they could, not enough, unfortunately for them, to try to stop Rick Scott. And I think now they're in an uncomfortable position of now trying to have to convince the rest of the world that they actually support his candidacy. If you just look at what they said in that last week of the primary, you can see this is pretty transparent.
We hear a lot about the enthusiasm gap between Republicans, a lot of it coming from that Tea Party that you talked about in terms of the Civil War. In that sense, the Civil War is helping them in terms of driving and getting out their base. Talk a little bit about turnout and where you see this notion of a gap between Republican voters and Democratic voters.
I think that there's actually a big misperception. We hear a lot of noise coming from the Republicans this year. There's no question about that. I don't think that noise is enthusiasm for Republicans. What that noise is the GOP Civil War. That noise is the Republican Party fighting the far-right Republican Party. And it's taking place all over the country. And these battles, I think, have created a lot of damage. In Florida, Bill McCollum still has yet to endorse Rick Scott. In California, Meg Whitman, she defeated the Tea Party candidate, but she had to lurch so far to the right to win that primary. She had to campaign with Pete Wilson, declaring to camera, I'm absolutely against amnesty, have images of border fences in her ads. And the day after the primary, she has to, in a pretty transparent way, lurch back to the center and run ads, Hispanic ads, to try to appeal to those moderate voters again. So I don't really believe that there is this enthusiasm for the right. And the fact that the polls have shown that Republican Party is in no better standing than the Democratic Party.
True, but people aren't that happy with the Democratic Party. As you say, the Democrats are in power. People, and a lot of the president's supporters are kind of depressed with where he's turned out in talking to strategists in various different races, in the House and Senate races. They'll say these first-time Obama voters, that a lot of people are talking about, they're not going to be coming out, and they didn't come out in those governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey. So if you discount the enthusiasm on the right, where are things on the left?
Well, I actually think we're going to turn those voters out. Just today, the Democratic Governors Association launched or unveiled our fall election strategy, and it really has three components. One component is the same ruthless targeting that Haley Barbour is talking about on the right. We're going to do that on our side, and perhaps even more ruthless. There are 37 races, but we're only going to invest in those states where we know we're going to make a difference.
So what does that whittle the list down to? 37 down to?
You know, you're a smart person. I'm going to leave it to you to figure that out, but I'm sure that you can figure out where the competitive races are. The second thing is turning out our base. We got to do it. We can do it. Just last week, we announced that we raised $1 million from our grassroots supporters in protest to the unprecedented Fox News donation of $1 million to the RGA. That is a sign to the world, and it ought to send chills down the spine of Republicans that we can raise $1 million to compete with their $1 million Fox donation. And then the third thing, and this is where I think we really get into turning out our voters and persuading independents, is we got to shine light on the Republicans. We got to talk about what's at stake in this year's election. As I mentioned earlier, there are two types of candidates running this year. You have the Tea Party candidates, like we have in Minnesota, Maine, Colorado, Illinois, Florida, and you have candidates who've been wounded by the Tea Party. And I think it's our duty to inform voters about the extreme positions and the past of these candidates. And when we do, I think we're going to do very well.
But in two of those instances, when you're raising money off of Fox News and you're inspiring Democrats off of the negatives about the opponents, why not? Where's the platform for Democrats? In other words, why aren't promises about what Democrats are going to do in the future part of this push? It seems all to be sort of negative about the other guys.
Well, it's actually an excellent question, and there's a philosophical difference between us and the Republican Governors Association. They think they can nationalize races. They think that they can make all these races simply a referendum on what's going on in D.C. I think that's a failed strategy. I think voters will resent it. They'll see through it. We believe elections for governors are won on local issues. Our candidates certainly are going to be talking about similar things. As I mentioned, they're going to talk about creating jobs. They're going to talk about developing industry. They're going to talk about improving healthcare, education, delivery of social services. They're going to be talking about, most importantly, about a vision for the state that's optimistic and that's one of prosperity. And that will be similar across the states. But in the end, these races are about local issues. In Wisconsin, it's about the biotech industry in Madison. In Maine, it might be about offshore drilling in Maine, what Paul LePage supports. In Vermont, it might be about Vermont Yankee, the nuclear plant. But there are local issues that will decide these races, and I think, frankly, to your question, efforts to nationalize governor's races have never worked in the past, and they're not going to work this year.
Okay, well, Nathan Daschle, we'll work that list down on our end from 37 to a smaller list, and then we'll check it with you another time. Thanks a lot.
You got it. Thank you, John.